right, good morning, everyone. How are you today? Terrific. I'm Anthony Crowell, the Dean and President here at New York Law School. I'm also the Faculty Director of the Center for New York City Law, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you. I'm very pleased that we are having this debate for New York City Comptroller, co-sponsored with the Citizens Budget Commission. Marissa Shorenstein from CBC is with us. Thank you so much for being here and for being our partner. And also thank you to Andrew Rein. We're very excited about this event, and it's very special for us. As many of you know, New York Law School has for 134 years engaged on key legal and policy matters affecting the city, and we consider ourselves a key resource for all of you and for the profession in helping to lead this great city and to inform the legal community and beyond. And we're very proud that 1/3 of our graduates today go into public service roles, making us the second largest feeder nationally into public service roles. And that's why it's critically important that what we do and how we engage with you has outcomes and great meaning. And certainly there's no greater meaning or outcome than to understand the key issues affecting municipal government and the ways in which the choices we make at the polls can influence the direction of our great city. Indeed, it's a transformative moment with massive changes happening at the federal level, and all of this has profound effects on New York. That places even more significance on the elections taking place this year, and with an open seat for comptroller and a highly competitive mayor's race, our city's future will be dramatically altered. The comptroller is critical in normal times, and even more so now. The comptroller's role in policymaking and enforcing accountability and transparency will be essential as the city grapples with a wide range of urgent issues. I teach state and local government law, and when I discuss the role of the comptroller, I tell them to remember 3 letters, FFC. That's because the comptroller's job is all about rooting out fraud, favoritism, and corruption. Today, we're joined by 2 candidates with long records of public service, City Council Member Justin Brannan and Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. I thank them both for being here and look forward to a very spirited and substantive debate. And I thank our moderators, Ben Max, the Program Director for the Center for New York City and State Law, and host of the Max Politics podcast, and Andrew Rein, President of the Citizens Budget Commission. I can't think of 2 more qualified moderators, both of whom provide invaluable civic service and leadership in their respective roles. And before I conclude and ask our next speaker to speak, Marissa, I just want to plug a few upcoming programs. On April 1st, we're hosting a program on the census organized by Councilmember Julie Menon, who led the city's 2020 census effort. On April 8th, we'll be co-hosting a mayoral forum with New Yorkers for Parks. And on April 17th, our next City Law Breakfast will feature Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch. So now I'm pleased to introduce Marissa Shorenstein, Chair of the Citizen Budget Commission. Marissa is a wonderful civic leader and someone I've known for many years. She serves as Chief External Affairs Officer for BSE Global, which owns the New York Liberty, Brooklyn Nets, and Barclays Center. She also previously was a principal at SKDK and president of the Northeast region for AT&T. She served as director of Governor Kathy Hochul's transition and served as press secretary and deputy communications director for Governor David Paterson. Please join me in welcoming Marissa Shorenstein.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here with you today and to see you again. And it's also a pleasure to co-sponsor this debate with New York Law School's Center for New York City and State Law, although I must admit, coming into a law school gives me a little, heart palpitations after spending many years going to night school at law school. I want to welcome CBC's trustees and guests. Thank you for joining us today and for your support all year long, and welcome to all of you joining us in the room and virtually. CBC and the center share a mission to make city and state government more transparent and effective, and this debate endeavors to do just that. We hope today's event accomplishes 2 objectives. First, of course, is to provide New Yorkers the opportunity to hear from the candidates for New York City Comptroller about their priorities, their qualifications, and how they would use the powers and duties of the office to improve New York's governance and New Yorkers' lives. But we also hope that this debate elevates New Yorkers' understanding of the role of comptroller, a role that is critical to maintaining the city's fiscal health, management of services, and accountability to the public. It's no secret that the controller's race doesn't receive as much attention as other races. Let's face it, most people can't even spell the word controller. Hint, comp, think money. Got it. We hope this debate helps change that a bit. With that, I want to introduce and bring up our moderators, Ben Max and Andrew Rein. And it is also my pleasure to invite our candidates to the stage. Justin Brannan, City Council member and chair of the City Council Finance Committee, and Mark Levine, Manhattan Borough President. Welcome.
Welcome to New York Law School and Citizens Budget Commission's Comptroller Candidate Debate. I'm Ben Max, Executive Editor and Program Director at New York Law School's Center for New York City and State Law. Thank you, Anthony and Marissa, for those opening remarks and for all that you do. Happy to work with CBC and its president, Andrew Rein, again, as well as the great CBC team, and glad to see so many CBC guests here today. A quick thank you to our team at the center, especially Rose White and Veronica Rose, who really make these events happen, as well as the other teams at New York Law School, events, marketing, security, and others, and the rest of our team at the Center for New York City and State Law.
I'm Andrew Rein, President of the Citizens Budget Commission. Happy to be back here with our longtime collaborator, Ben Max. I think you were the co-founder of the What's the Data Point podcast with us.
Except.
A wonderful thing that continues to this day. But of course, listen to Ben's podcast as well. And I want to thank our chair, Marissa Shorenstein. I want to thank Dean Crowell, and I want to thank all of our trustees and who support and guide our work, as well as our staff who put this together with your team.
I promise you're going to hear from the candidates in like 2 minutes. So we're about to get going here. The job of city controller is important to the fiscal health, governmental integrity, and broader well-being of our city. New York City, as everyone in this room knows, is at a critical juncture. While the economy continues to grow, years of disruption, starting with the pandemic, have given New Yorkers reason to feel uncertainty about the city. There's a great deal of turmoil right now, given the new federal administration, upheaval at City Hall, and more. We are amid state budget season, of course, and city budget season, and elections to choose the mayor, public advocate, borough president, city council, and of course, controller, as well as other offices.
The next controller will play a critical role in New York City's future by providing the public with information to hold the administration and agencies accountable, auditing city agencies, being the custodian and investment advisor to the 5 pension funds and their $280 billion of assets, co-supervising the issuance of billions of dollars of debt, ensuring the integrity of the contracting process, and being a watchdog and making recommendations to promote the city's fiscal health. This moment is particularly important. The mayor's preliminary budget is balanced for next year and leaves $5 billion budget gaps in the future, but the state and city controllers and the Citizens Budget Commission have reported that those gaps are actually $7 to $10 billion when accounting for under-budgeted costs, notwithstanding expected higher revenues. Furthermore, the federal government may well reduce some of the $8 billion of aid it provides to the city, some of the $90 billion of aid it provides to the state, and support it provides to health and hospitals, New York City Housing Authority, and even the MTA, all of which could put more pressure on the city finances. So that is why it is critical that New York's controller be independent and lift the veil so that you, the public, can have an unbiased information about your money, your government, your city.
So today's debate includes 2 people who want to be your next controller, both running in the Democratic primary set for June. There are other candidates running as well. Early voting starts June 14th and primary day is June 24th. There's also mail-in voting. While a number of individuals have declared or voiced their desire to be candidates, our participants qualified for this debate by raising at least $125,000 in private contributions by February 15th, a relatively solid but modest sign of viability in a citywide race. We urge all of you to take the time to learn more about today's participants and the other candidates who may be running. We'll know a lot more about who will be on the ballot soon. All right, our rules for today. There will be a series of main questions where each candidate will get 2 minutes each to answer the same general question. Then there will be follow-ups with responses limited to 1 minute each. After that series of 2-minute responses, there'll be a short answer section where candidates will have 1 minute each to answer. Quick rebuttals or clarifications requested by us will be limited to 30 seconds. And we will close the debate with the crowd-pleasing lightning round where answers must be yes or no or otherwise very brief in nature. Candidates, time will be kept by Adam sitting right here, who will give you 15-second warnings to wrap up and then indicate when time is up, and we will jump in. So let's begin. Not opening statements, but close. We're going to start 2 minutes each here, and we're going to start with Mr. Levine and then go to Mr. Brannan, and we'll alternate who begins each round. So please succinctly describe the role of Comptroller, your top 3 priorities, and how you will use the powers of the office to achieve them. 2 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Ben and Andrew and Anthony and Marissa, 2 institutions here in New York Law School, CBC, which are important at any time in New York and now more than ever. The job of the Comptroller is to be an independent voice on behalf of the people of New York City, to hold the mayor and every agency of city government accountable, to give great results and great services, to get the best for taxpayer money. This is a job with huge operational responsibilities, including serving as custodian of the 5 pension funds, as co-issuer of the city's bonds, overseeing debt management, reviewing and certifying contracts, enforcing our wage laws, approving our tort claims process, and of course, using the power of audit, oversight, investigation, and if need be, subpoena to ensure that every agency of city government is free of fraud and delivering for the people. This is an extremely important office. New York City cannot function unless you have a strong and effective comptroller. I will use the powers of this office to address critical challenges in New York City, including our epic affordability crisis, which is now driven by the highest rents in New York City history, serious public safety challenges, driven in part by a broken mental health system, and a broken contract payment system, which leaves human service nonprofits waiting for months and even years for payment on services they've already provided. This is an extremely important office. I will be an activist comptroller, just as I have been an activist leader throughout my entire career.
Thank you. Mr. Brannan, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, CBC, for having us. I believe the Comptroller's office over the next 4 years, certainly with the threat and the uncertainty and chaos coming from Washington, is going to be more critical than ever. Ever since I was elected, I wake up every day and say to myself, the decisions I make today, will they make life better for working people? And over the next 4 years, with the threat of so much economic uncertainty and cruelty and chaos coming from Washington, I think the Comptroller's office is going to have to do 2 things. Number one, we're going to have to make sure that we're safeguarding our pension system and our north of $115 billion budget, and that we're also standing in the breach between the federal government and our most vulnerable here in the city of New York, who stand to suffer and be negatively impacted the most from the uncertainty and chaos in Washington. First and foremost, we have to be delivering strong, stable, long-term returns for our 5 pension systems. That is paramount for the Comptroller's office, but it's also talking about bringing down the cost of living in the city, and everyone's talking about the affordability crisis. Well, that $115 billion budget is the sharpest tool we have to bring down and address the cost of living in this city, and ensuring that every dime of that $115 billion budget is going towards that goal of keeping working families in this city is going to be my #1 priority over the next 4 years.
Thank you. A couple follow-ups, so 1 minute each here. Mr. Brannan, let's stick with you. How would you use the Office of Comptroller to improve city government accountability and transparency specifically? How would you use the office to improve city government accountability and transparency? 1 minute.
I think, one of the hallmarks of my career in service so far has been trying to demystify government. And I think transparency is really power in those situations. I think New Yorkers have to better understand that $115 billion budget is made up of their tax dollars, and it's important that they understand where that money is going. And the pension system as well serves over 750,000 retirees. for them to better understand how that money is being spent. Ultimately, knowledge is power in those situations. And I think in this administration now, we have never seen a lack of transparency to this level, whether it's through under budgeting, whether it's through forecast, fuzzy math forecasting. It's never been this bad. And we have to get back to a place where New Yorkers can trust their government to at least be honest with them with what's what, right? Politics is about negotiating our priorities, but there should be no politics in forecasting. The money is the money. The tax receipts are the tax receipts. We know the economy is strong in this city. We shouldn't be arguing over how much money is there when it's public information.
Same question to you, Mr. Levine. How would you use the office to improve city government accountability and transparency? 1 minute.
Oh, the people of the city deserve a voice in the budget process, more of a role in the budget process that they currently have. I support the CBC's proposal for a charter amendment that would require that on a regular basis, there's a survey of all New Yorkers to understand their take on the quality of services, and that we as leaders for the budget and government take that into account when we plan for the long term. And I support more transparent and accurate budgeting, which we're not living up to currently. Repeatedly, year after year, there are billions of dollars of expenses that we know we're going to incur that are not accounted for in the mayor's proposed budgets. It's happening again this year. It shortchanges the public. In the name of transparency, the one thing we need to agree on is that our budgets reflect the expenses we know we're going to incur and the income we know are going to receive. I'll fight for that transparency. I'll fight for public participation as a comptroller dedicated to these causes.
All right, one more. Mr. Levine, let's stay with you. In just 1 minute here, what are your top qualifications for this job?
I'm really proud, Ben, to have founded a community development financial institution, a community credit union. It's called Neighborhood Trust Federal Credit Union in Washington Heights. I think Jackie Williams is here from those days in the credit union world. This credit union in Washington Heights is still going strong, $100 million lent to low-income families in the neighborhood, helping them do everything from buy a home computer to start a small business. I know what it is to make payroll every 2 weeks. I know what it is to read a financial statement. And I know what it is to fight for financial empowerment for regular New Yorkers. I will bring that record with me to the Office of the Comptroller, to take that work citywide, to help the unbanked access financial services, to help advance financial literacy, including for young people in our schools, to take banking into the schools so that kids can start at a young age understanding what it is to maintain a savings account and to earn interest. I'll be a comptroller that takes finance to the people, building on my record of doing that for Uptown Manhattan.
Thank you. Mr. Brannan, top qualifications.
For the last 3.5 years, I've served as finance chair of the New York City Council, where I've overseen and negotiated the largest municipal budget in the country. And I've been right about the budget, not because I'm a math wizard, but because I'm unafraid to speak truth to power. When the mayor famously said that the migrant crisis was going to bankrupt the city, we immediately said that that was a bunch of baloney, and sure enough, 2 years later, it's the case. Being called Budget Nostradamus is not because I have some inside information. It's because I'm honest, and ultimately transparency is about trust. And my qualifications are that I'm a fighter, right? I've fought with the mayor over the past 3 years to claw back over $1 billion in cuts that he tried to make to our parks, our libraries, our arts and cultural institutions, to CUNY. And I know where the bodies are buried in the budget. I know the games that OMB plays, and I want to continue that service.
Very briefly, in 30 seconds, Mr. Levine, you said you want to be an activist comptroller. Can you explain what that means in 30 seconds, please?
Absolutely. It means that I'll push an agenda. I'll push an agenda to solve our affordable housing crisis by investing city pension money and financing housing that would not otherwise be built. I'll be unafraid to push back against the mayor when he or she is engaging in shady budget practices, when they're neglecting to lead for our city. I'll be totally independent, as I have been over my entire career. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, I will fight to fix a broken contracting system. I'll fight to fix a broken mental health system. I will identify tough problems and organize to solve them.
And Mr. Brannan, in 30 seconds, you said transparency has never been this bad in the mayoral administration related to the budget. Can you name something you've done as finance chair to respond to that?
Sure. I mean, we've fought really hard for what I guess people in this room, maybe only the people in this room would understand, the units of appropriation, to better get our arms around some of the colossal pieces of this budget. And these are transparency tools that have never been used before, and trying to really wrap your arms around a $115 billion budget. One of the things that we've negotiated is for more of those units of appropriation so that New Yorkers can better understand, a NYPD budget that's north of $11 billion, where some of that money actually goes. I think
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to our next major question, but continuing on this theme, monitoring the city's fiscal health, which is a critical role of the controller. The mayor's preliminary budget is balanced for next year, but reports gaps that the city and state controllers say are actually much larger. And the Citizens Budget Commission pointed out that adjusting for the timing of payments, the city actually spent $1.1 billion more on fiscal year 2024 obligations than it received that year in revenue. It spent more than it received. So the question, starting with Mr. Brannan, what is your assessment of the city's long-run fiscal health, and what, as controller, would you specifically do to improve it?
Sure, it's a great question. Under budgeting is one of the few things I think I agree with CBC on. But it's never been this bad because we've never had an administration that's been so afraid of being transparent, and it's completely masking our actual fiscal health and our fiscal strength. New York City's economy is strong. Against all odds, the 5 boroughs are outperforming the rest of the state, and everything is moving in the right direction. But because this administration, and particularly OMB, have been pushing this doom and gloom false austerity scenario, it's completely perverted the outlook of our economy to their political benefit, right? They do this because they don't want to work with the council on how to figure out how to spend the money. They don't want to treat the council like a co-equal branch of government. So they play 3-card Monte and they hide the ball with the money until they legally can no longer do that. So I've fought for more realistic budgeting currently as finance chair, and trying to get some more truth in this, in transparency in budgeting. Like I said, negotiating our priorities is ultimately about politics, and that's fine. But the tax receipts are the tax receipts, and it shouldn't be so hard for us to better understand how much money we have to play with. And I think New Yorkers would have a better feeling about their city if they knew that the economy was strong and we didn't have a mayor who was out there telling everyone that the city was on the verge of bankruptcy when it never was true in the first place.
Just a point of clarification, would you assess the city's long-run fiscal health as strong?
Yes, I would.
Mr. Levine, same question, 2 minutes the same. Your assessment of the city's long-run fiscal health, and what, as controller, would you do to improve it?
I am really proud of how New York City has come roaring back since the pandemic. We've defied the critics again and again. But I have to say, even the budget that the mayor proposed in January had some cause for concern, underestimating expenses in categories like Carter cases. Of course, we have to support special ed, but let's account for it. Underestimating the expense of the expansion of the city FEPS program. I support that expansion, but let's account for it. Underestimating overtime expenses. And then Donald Trump took office. And since his inauguration, we have seen nothing but chaos and cruelty from Washington, which is already wreaking havoc on our economy with a chaotic tariff policy, which threatens one of our largest trading partners, one of New York City's largest trading partners, Canada, one of our largest source of foreign visitors, Canada, which is already undermining nonprofits with threat to existing federal contracts. And all of that is before we have endured what will likely be a brutal Republican tax bill that will almost certainly balance the books to fund tax cuts for billionaires by cutting critical services in healthcare through Medicaid, in education, support for housing. This is coming, and it's going to hit New York City hard. It's going to hit not just our people, but our fiscal health. We need to be ready to fight back. We need to be ready to fight in Washington. The Comptroller needs to be ready to sue if necessary, and we need to have a budget that can withstand those hits. And that is going to mean we have to add to our reserve and be a little more cautious in our forecasting right now, because there is reason to worry that what's coming right now will be very difficult for New York. We can't ignore that. We need to start preparing now to protect our people, our interests, and our values.
Thank you. Let's continue with the fiscal health and play off of what Mr. Levine was just talking and back to Mr. Levine. So be more specific, if you would, about what we should be doing in this year's budget and next year's budget to be preparing for potential federal cuts and identifying which areas are the biggest vulnerabilities.
Well, because thankfully, tax receipts have been strong this year. Again, New York City defying expectations. We're going to be able to balance our budget this year. But we want to make sure that we are doing it in a cautious way. We want to make sure that we are adding to our reserve fund. I support the CBC's call to add $1 billion more to our rainy day fund. We have a practice of rolling over expenses when we can by prepaying at the end of the year. I want to make sure we do that in a robust way. We've been pulling back from that in recent years. I want to be set up for the coming fiscal year in a way that will insulate New York City and New Yorkers from the blows that could come from Washington. And that means being a little more cautious in our budget this year and taking seriously out your deficits, which probably amount to as much as $7 to $10 billion. So now is the time to prepare. Let's not wait for the Republican tax bill to be passed in 6 months' time. Let's prepare now through the budget process today.
Thank you, Mr. Brannan. Same question. What should the city be doing specifically to prepare for potential federal cuts, and where do you see the biggest vulnerability?
Sure. I think one of the problems that sort of casts a shadow over all of these questions in this moment is that we don't have budget transparency that allows an honest conversation to really predict or prepare for the threat of Washington, right? There is not a city in this country that can survive without federal grants and federal subsidy. But because OMB has done such a great job at being so opaque about where we stand, and the council has had to fight so hard to get that transparency, it's really handicapping us in this moment. Whether we're, the council has fought for multi-year budget forecasts and other things that could allow us to be a little bit more prepared. But we have to be ready. Almost 10% of our budget is federal grants. And, Department of Education alone is about $3 billion of federal subsidy. We have to be prepared. The city council, our side, the mighty 60 people on the city council finance team are working hard to do sort of these doomsday exercises because, frankly, the mayor's side is not doing that. They're not preparing for that. So, but we have to do everything we can. The problem is that we're being sort of sidelined because we don't have real transparency right now.
Just a quick follow-up before the next question. Potential Medicaid cuts wouldn't hit the city directly as much as it would hit health and hospitals. What should the city be preparing for that, or was that a health and hospitals problem?
Sure. I mean, so the city council fought really hard to get the $8 billion that we currently have in reserves. It's record reserves. The other concern is, the CBC's proposal to put another billion aside. The political calculation there too is that we don't want Washington to think that we can handle these cuts. So putting more money aside would then signal to Washington that we've got the money we need to withstand their cuts. So we have to be careful there. I'm unfortunately represented by Nicole Maliotakis in Congress, and even she is fired up and upset about the cuts to Medicaid, which is a good sign for me because even some of the Republicans are losing their minds about it. So we're hoping that could be a backstop to those cuts.
And Mr. Levine, same question in terms of Medicaid and health and hospitals. What should the city be doing?
We just can't overstate how important the public hospitals are to New York City. They saved the city in many ways during COVID, and they are entirely dependent on Medicaid. Under the leadership of the current CEO, Mitch Katz, they're in the strongest fiscal position that they've been probably in decades. But this would be a blow. And we have to make sure that it doesn't result in the loss of critical safety net medical services to New Yorkers. So I think the city is going to have to be ready to step in and fill the gap wherever possible. This would have to rate as one of the highest priorities if we're facing a panoply of cuts. Maintaining medical care for low-income New Yorkers has to be one of our top priorities. I will certainly be speaking out in favor of the city helping to plug those gaps.
Thank you. And staying on the city's health for one more question, Mr. Brannan. As City Council Finance Chair, you criticized the administration's revenue estimates. We've just talked, your words were fuzzy math forecasting. Yet you did adopt a budget that included unrealistic declines in funding for housing vouchers, overtime, and others that we and the city and state controllers caused under budgeting of billions of dollars in the current year when the budget was adopted. How would your focus or perspective change as controller? Would you spotlight under budgeting of programs more, such as in budget adoption? And would your revenue estimates be any more conservative given the risk that revenue shortfalls pose to services and the fiscal situation?
So, I mean, there's a reason why the city council fought so hard to get that $8 billion in our reserves. And that was something that, the city council had to prioritize in our negotiations. I think, again, under budgeting really didn't become a problem, at least in our view, until FY23, I'd say, in a real way. And that is, around the same time that OMB really started, closing the blinds on us as far as the budget is concerned. So I think, unfortunately, it sort of characterizes the fiscal health of the city because OMB is so focused on playing hide the ball. And that's something that needs to change because then, you have mid-year adjustments that inevitably need to happen when at the time we knew how much money was there in the first place. So I think, look, I also think what I don't understand, frankly, is with this administration that there's so many priorities that the city council has fought for, whether it's parks or libraries or CUNY or early childhood education, that any other mayor would also want to fund because these are popular programs with voters and with New Yorkers. So it's puzzling to us that this mayor has fought us on that.
Just a quick follow-up tying some of these comments together. City Council's revenue estimates are $2 to $3 billion higher than the both city and state controllers. Yet because of under budgeting, even using the City Council's estimates, there are $4 to $6 billion gaps in the future. You stated before that you thought the fiscal situation was, you thought the city's fiscal future was strong. How do you explain that how do you jibe that with those gaps that are out there?
I don't agree that the gaps are that large, and I think the gaps that do exist are manageable. And again, part of the problem is that the outlook has been perverted by what OMB is telling us. I mean, I remember a time when we had CBC, IBO, WFP, the Democratic Socialist, and the City Council all on the same page about the future of our budget. The only guy that was on the other side was OMB. So I think we've been proven right that we call it like we see it. And those gaps are manageable. They are not that large.
Mr. Levine, the front page of your campaign website highlights 4 issues: solving our housing crisis, improving public safety, ensuring access to good education, and modernizing government. While all important, they do not include fiscal oversight, pensions, contracting, or debt. How does your website's focus reflect how you plan to approach the job as controller?
Well, as I said in my opening statement, the baseline for this job is to run an extremely important office that is critical to the functioning of government. This is a serious city agency, but it has levers that give the opportunity and the obligation to fight against the larger challenges that New York is facing. And a good comptroller, an activist comptroller, can and will do things like take on our housing affordability crisis. I'm very proud to have published a plan that details how I want to invest city pension money in a prudent way in financing affordable housing that would not otherwise be built. I am proud to be speaking out on behalf of our human service nonprofits who deserve a contracting system that pays them on time. I've spoken out repeatedly about the need to restore our broken mental health system so people who are struggling on the street with severe untreated mental illness are instead in long-term inpatient care. A comptroller should be fighting for these objectives, and I will, using the powers of the office for the good of the city.
Thank you, and staying with Mr. Levine for a moment. Despite the pandemic, the recession, and I believe 5 rounds of savings programs, city funding spending increased 25% faster than inflation in the last 6 years. As controller, would you recommend restraining spending growth, and if so, how?
Look, as I said, I'm really proud of the fact that New York City has come roaring back by almost any measure. We had 65 million visitors last year. We're getting 4.5 million people on the subway in many days. And it has resulted in a robust economy that's allowed us to make critical investments in things like expanding UPK and 3K, and I support those investments. But I think we're entering a new era now because we have a president who is a menace to the economic health of New York City and America. And it's time to take that into account
Thank you.
beginning in this budget cycle.
Mr. Brannan, you said those gaps are manageable. Would you support restraining spending going forward?
I mean, I think we need to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We obviously can't invest in massive new programs right now, but we can make targeted investments and double down on what's working. Like our early childhood education system, like getting serious about universal childcare, investing in our parks and our libraries. I mean, this has been our mantra. The things that make New York City great, the things that keep working families in this city have to be part of those priorities. And I believe the way we can build a firewall around this city over the next 4 years is by safeguarding that budget and ensuring that we're spending in the right places.
Thank you. Now let's turn to audits.
That was an evil smile.
The Comptroller is required to do an audit in each city agency at least every 4 years. Audits are key to holding agencies accountable for complying with specific rules, as well as performing their functions as intended. Starting with Mr. Levine, please identify 1 or 2 audits that you would prioritize, why those, and what specifically, and not conceptually, but what measures would your audit be driven by? Mr. Levine, 2 minutes.
Look, the Comptroller's office is required to audit every city agency every 4 years, but the office can go deeper with targeted investigations. And there's a long list of agencies that need that kind of scrutiny, including HPD. If you've got a housing project ready to go, and you've got the property, and you've got the developer, you might even have the financing in place, you have to add another 12 to 18 months to the timeline just to allow HPD to get through approving the loan documents and the term sheets, et cetera. There are people who are in homeless shelters for another 12 to 18 months waiting for that process to play out. So that will be a key area that I will investigate. In the public schools, if you have a child who is struggling in a traditional learning setting, just to get them evaluated can be a years-long odyssey, let alone getting them the services that they need, often requiring parents to sue. And I will investigate that process to make sure that New York City is not an obstacle to getting young people the extra interventions they need, but that we enable it. In NYCHA, there's a list that's too long, but we have thousands of vacant apartments right now in NYCHA in the midst of a housing crisis. Sometimes the delay can be 9 months or 12 months to turn around a vacant apartment. That needs to be investigated. And of course, the repair backlog for everything from leaky pipes to mold in NYCHA is outrageous and unacceptably long. In the Department of Homeless Services, we're giving out billions of dollars of contracts, and the world of providers is all over the map. There's some that are doing right by their constituents and right by the surrounding communities, and some that are not. We need to understand what are the metrics by which DHS is approving and re-upping those contracts. I will use these tools to investigate these and many other agencies. I won't be afraid of the results wherever they lead. I won't be afraid to support success and to point to failures if warranted.
Thank you. And I'll just say you used the word investigate, I think 5 times, and not the word audit. Specifically, what measures would you audit, for example, your HPD audit? What are the measures you would be auditing against?
Well, as you know, Andrew, government accounting is ruled by the standards of the Government Accounting Standards Board, GSAB, and the audits are highly prescribed and extremely important. They can often take years. In fact, the current comptroller is still finishing audits that were started under the previous comptroller. They're important, but we can be nimble and if need be aggressive with investigations that can identify targets and metrics not covered by the GSAB. I won't be scared to use those tools as well.
Mr. Brannan, same question. 1 or 2 audits you would prioritize, why, and what specifically would you be auditing?
Probably start with the Manhattan Borough President's office. I would start with the Department of Education. I used to work at DOE. proudly worked at Tweed, which is really the silo capital of the world, with a $35 billion budget. I don't know a parent in the city that thinks their kid is getting a $35 billion education. And that's saying nothing of the great folks that work at the DOE, but that money is not getting to the classrooms. So figuring out what happens along the way from that $35 billion budget to a classroom in Southeast Queens is something that I'm very excited about really diving into. I think it's important, though, to note as well that the audit really is just the beginning, right? If I open the hood of your car and I say, well, yeah, that is broken, and then I walk away and leave you on the side of the highway, that doesn't help anybody. You actually then have to come up with the policy prescriptions to fix what you found broken in the audit. And that requires working, whether it's with the state legislature or the city council, to come up with how you fix those things. And I think that's something we need to do a better job at, right? The headline that says, audit finds NYCHA XXX. Okay, but what are you going to do about it? And I think the controller also has a responsibility to come up with those solutions.
Thank you. And staying with Mr. Brannan for a second, can you describe a past audit that you think was beneficial to New Yorkers? And if not, do you think that the audit function has not been well used by past controllers?
I think some of the NYCHA audits that Controller Lander has done have been impactful, and I think also bringing the community to better understand what these audits mean and why government dysfunction is not only maddening and frustrating, but it's actually delaying the delivery of critical city services, and it's actually it's the reason why someone waits on hold for too long to get their housing voucher processed, or it's a reason why a meal doesn't get delivered to someone that's, food insecure. I think there's a way for the controller's office to universalize this a little bit, make it a little less wonky, so people understand that these are your tax dollars. And if government dysfunction is so calcified and so rusted, it shouldn't just be upsetting to those of us in the political class. It's upsetting to New Yorkers because they're not getting a good return on their tax investment.
Mr. Levine, same question. Can you describe the past audit that you considered beneficial? And if not, has the audit function not been well used?
I want to compliment current Comptroller Lander on not just auditing NYCHA, but bringing residents of NYCHA in on the process. I think he called it participatory auditing, modeled on something the council member and I have done, participatory budgeting for capital expenses. I think the people who are directly impacted by these audits need to have a voice in how they're crafted and carried out. So kudos to Comptroller Lander for that. But I want to shout out Comptroller John Liu, who doesn't get enough credit for uncovering a major corruption scandal in city government, the City Time scandal that uncovered hundreds of billions of dollars of wasteful spending. This is, of course, key to the Comptroller's office to root out corruption, which is an ever-present threat, including today. So I'll use the tools both to find that corruption and to bring regular New Yorkers in to be part of the audit process.
And just a quick follow-up, how would you make your audits more impactful than past audits and actually change the operations of city government? Mr. Levine and Mr. Brannan.
I'm going to focus a lot on how government can deliver services to New Yorkers better. We have an antiquated city government that is in many ways stuck in the 1990s. There are still fax machines used in city agencies. That is true. And I'm going to point to ways that technology can improve the experience for workers and can improve outcomes for New Yorkers and save taxpayer monies. I have a technical background. I'll draw on this in using the power of audit, investigation, and oversight to drag city agencies into the year 2025 and beyond.
Mr. Brannan, how do you make the audits more impactful than they've been in the past?
I think you make audits more impactful by explaining to the public in a simple way why these audits are important and why, if their tax dollars are being wasted, and how it directly impacts them and how it delays the delivery of essential city services. I think making those comparisons and examples of why this matters, and also talking about other priorities, right? Universal childcare has to be one of our top priorities right now. And an audit that could find that we're wasting $200 or $300 million in X agency would allow us what we need, the resources we need to do a universal childcare pilot. So making those connections and getting it a little less wonky is what it's all about.
Thank you.
All right, let's turn to, please, excuse us. we're going to continue the debate. Thank you. Sir, please. We're going to continue on contracts. Excuse us. We're going to continue the debate. All right, we're going to move on. We hope you can stay in the debate.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
We're gonna, you both referenced contracts.
As my co-host, co-sponsor said, we did have a set of criteria we set up. And anybody who was eligible, meeting those criteria, we invited. We're very glad to have the candidate here, and we will continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Sir, we're gonna ask you to leave if you continue. Please stop. Thank you.
Please.
We're going to return. We're going to return to contracts which you've both raised at different times. So by the city charter, the comptroller's role in contracting is limited primarily to registering contracts after reviewing them for 3 specific criteria. Essentially, integrity, accountability, and fiscal compliance. We all know that contracts are often registered long after services should or do start, and city payment delays are stressing the nonprofit and private sectors alike. You have both talked about speeding up contracts and increasing the share of contracts to MWBE. So, specifically, what would you do as comptroller to eliminate retroactive contracts and speed up payments? This is 2 minutes each, beginning with Mr. Brannan. What would you do to eliminate retroactive contracts and speed up payments?
So the fact that our nonprofit partners are being treated so horribly by the city of New York is just completely unacceptable. The city of New York asked our nonprofits to handle issues that the city can't handle, or doesn't have the capacity to do on their own. They entrust these nonprofits to do this critical work, and then when it's payday, they don't pick up the phone, and it's wrong. Meanwhile, fly-by-night, sham companies like .go get $450 million checks written like we're handing out candy on Halloween. It's completely wrong. I introduced a bill that would put the city on the hook, make the city responsible for the interest on loans that nonprofits take out while they wait to get paid. I've never gotten a call from OMB quicker than when they saw that law go up, when they saw that bill get introduced. It's wrong. Everyone knows that it's wrong. When the mayor was first elected, he famously cleared out about $6 billion in backlogged contract payments. It shows that it can be done, but it needs to be done in a sustainable way and without the interference of government ADD, where they focus on it for a little bit and then they get distracted on something else. Ultimately, in the comptroller's office, you have to make sure that that contract is on your desk for as little time as possible, and making sure that you have a team that's fully staffed to do that, it gets the robust oversight that it needs, but that it's out the door and onto the mayor's desk as quickly as possible. We could also look more into multi-year contracts. I think some of these organizations that have been doing fantastic work for the city for decades shouldn't have to fight every year for $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000, and that is a personal and important priority for me, and would be as comptroller.
Thank you. Mr. Levine, 2 minutes for you. What would you do to speed up contracts and eliminate retroactive contracts?
I mean, this is really a scandal, Ben. We are asking nonprofits to provide critical services in this city, whether it is after-school programs, food for homebound seniors, support for domestic violence victims, foster care. They provide these critical services. They pay the salaries and the rent and other expenses, and then we don't reimburse them, sometimes for 6 months or 12 months or years. And it threatens to bring the human service nonprofit sector to its knees, which would have devastating consequences for New York City. I released a plan this morning to fix this, calling for control of the relatively obscure body which oversees this, the Procurement Policy Board, to have majority vote by the Comptroller so that we can start to put policies in place to fix this, including a change that we pay in the way we pay out invoices. Right now, if there's a question on 2% of an invoice, the whole thing is held up with devastating financial consequences. Why don't we pay out 80% or 90% of that invoice? It can be clawed back in an audit if necessary, while we look into any disputed portions of those contracts. We also believe that every city agency needs to be held account and graded by the Comptroller's office for how quickly they bring the contracts to the certification stage at the Comptroller's office. We can do these things so that the nonprofits which are out there providing critical services to the life and welfare of New York get the resources they need to survive healthily, especially with threats coming from Washington. This will be one of my top priorities as Comptroller.
So a follow-up here, 1 minute each, sticking with you, Mr. Levine. What leverage does the Comptroller have here? You have a plan, but other Comptrollers have talked about this as well and worked on it. What leverage does the Comptroller have, and how would you be able to accomplish changes when others have not? What would be different about your tackling of this problem?
At the moment, the balance of power does lie with the mayor because of their control of the Procurement Policy Board. I've articulated a plan to change that by giving a majority vote to the Comptroller. So the Comptroller, independent of the mayor's office, can set some of the policies that I've just articulated. I will certainly use the power of the bully pulpit and other levers that we have in the contracting process, in the budget oversight process, in the audit process to defend this sector that is under attack right now. Also called for the elevation of the mayor's office of contracts to be a full mayoral agency so that it has more direct oversight by the city council, so that its staffing and budget is more insulated, and so that it elevates the job of approving contracts quickly within City Hall. We can do these things. It will be a game change for nonprofits, and I will put all my political capital on the line as Comptroller to do it.
Mr. Brannan, same question to you. How would you be different than your predecessors in actually making more progress on this issue?
I think we've done a good job collectively in the nonprofit sector and the coalition of the willing who care about this to elevate this issue. So much so that I believe there was a mayoral forum that was focused basically on procurement reform. So we're doing our best to make procurement reform sexy again. I don't think we need another task force or another bill or another law or another anything. The mayor has already shown that this can be done. $6 billion of backlog payments were paid out within the first 6 or 7 months of his administration. That can be done again. It's a staffing issue as well. You have agencies right now that are downright skeletal on the staffing level, on the folks who actually do this work. That's a big issue too. But you need a mayor who actually cares about this stuff. And I think we've been able to elevate that so that it's not just about paying nonprofits. It's about, if you don't pay the nonprofits, that the services to some of our most vulnerable are delayed or denied. And building that political coalition is what's going to change it ultimately.
30 seconds more each on this. Excuse us. We're going to continue. 30 more seconds each. Please, we're going to continue. Thank you. 30 more seconds staying with you, Mr. Brannan. You said you had a bill. You also said we don't necessarily need new bills or laws. I understand you said it's about the mayor's prerogative, but there might be leverage needed. But just in 30 seconds, legislation at the city, state level, charter changes, what of any legal changes do you support to shift this system?
Sure. So the bill I sort of introduced it because I didn't want to pass it. It had the desired effect. It got OMB to now meet with us once every 2 weeks to talk about fixing this process. I don't think anything else needs to happen. I think if the mayor's office actually follows the city charter, then these bills would be processed quickly. So right now, they're just not following the law. So I don't think we need another task force or another bill. However, the bill I introduced to put the mayor's office on the hook and make them responsible for interest paid on loans to nonprofits is helping because it got them to wake up.
Ms. Levine, I know you got at this a little bit already, but if you could just list off in 30 seconds specific city, state, charter changes that you would support to impact the system of contract payment.
Yes, absolutely. I want to change oversight and control of the Procurement Policy Board, so the balance of power, the balance of votes lies with the Comptroller. I want to elevate the mayor's office of contracts to be a full mayoral department, among other things. That would require that its metrics appear in the mayor's management report, so we have public transparency and accountability on contract payments. And I want to change the way we pay out invoices. So we don't hold up a massive invoice because there's a question on one $50 expense, that we pay out a large portion, which can be clawed back in audit so that nonprofits can remain whole and continue to provide critical services.
Turning to another function of the office, management of the pension system and being on the boards and pension advisor. The city's 5 pension systems have assets totaling $280 billion. Annual city pension contributions grow from 10.1 billion this year to 11.3 billion by fiscal year 2029. So the question, what is your investment strategy to ensure sufficient returns so that A, the system is well-funded and can pay retiree pensions, and B, annual city contributions don't squeeze out other priorities? Mr. Levine, you have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that the staffing of the Bureau of Asset Management at the Comptroller's office is staffed by the most qualified, most diverse, and best compensated staff possible. They have an extremely important mission, which is protecting the pensions of people who have served this city and who have a right to receive a healthy pension in their retirement. That is not a small obligation, and in many ways, it's the top obligation of the Comptroller's office. And of course, they're going to pursue a strategy based on good financial fundamentals, including investing in a diversified way across asset classes, equities, fixed income, real estate, private equity, and across a globally diversified portfolio. There's also an opportunity consistent with that goal of maintaining the health of the portfolio to advance our values by flexing our muscle as shareholders so that we demand that corporate America adhere to transparency and accountability itself, by demanding that a corporate America adhere to bold climate agendas, by ensuring that we invest in what are dynamic growth industries like green technology, and by taking a portion of our pension money, as allowed under the category of economically targeted investments, to finance critical projects in the 5 boroughs of New York City. That will get good returns, but that can foment economic development here that might not otherwise occur, and can finance affordable housing here that might not otherwise be built. We can do these things. We can have a top-notch Bureau of Asset Management, which achieves solid returns for retirees and advances our values consistent with those goals. This will be my agenda as Comptroller.
Mr. Brannan, same question. What is your investment strategy to ensure sufficient returns to pay pensions and so city contributions don't squeeze out other budget priorities? 2 minutes, please.
Sure. I think delivering responsible and long-term stabilized returns for retirees is easily the #1 responsibility of the Comptroller's office. Safeguarding that pension system over the next 4 years with the chaos and threats, economic threats from Washington, is going to be more important than ever. I do believe we can do more to leverage our ETIs to invest in affordable housing. I do think that's an important regenerative investment for the city. It's good for our economy. It's good for keeping working families here. I also think we should be doing more with sort of use. I think the power dynamic is a little bit flipped right now with our pension system. I think with the almost $300 billion pension system, we need to be calling the shots with the money managers. And from what I'm hearing from some of the trustees I've met with, we don't feel that that's happening. We think the money managers have too much of a say, and the trustees and the controller, they're not doing what we decided to do. I have a plan to not. I think Controller Lander and previous Controller Stringer have done a good job with divesting from oil and gas. I think we need to go a step further. You're seeing in red states where they're taking their smaller pension funds and they're telling money managers, if you want to manage even a piece of our pension funds, you have to get out of alternative energy investments and only invest in oil and gas. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing the opposite here and saying, look, if you want to manage our money, you cannot be commingling our funds with other oil and gas investments. And it's not, because oil and gas investments ultimately are not only toxic for the environment, they're toxic for our portfolio. We need to have a planet to enjoy our pension on. And that needs to be one of the values that is first and foremost here, in addition to obviously bringing back stable returns for our retirees.
And just a point of clarification, there are, in the city, as opposed to the state, there are 5 different pension boards that are managed separately. I just want to clarify, were you saying that should be changed structurally?
No, not necessarily. I just think from anecdotally, from what I'm hearing from folks, from trustees that I talk to, there seems to be a disconnect there that I think we should get a little bit more muscular on.
Okay, thank you. You've both talked about economically targeted investment, ETI, ESG, environmental sustainability and governance activities, as well as divestment. Would you, starting with Mr. Brannan, would you specifically analyze the returns that you would get from those investments, and how would you compensate for those with the rest of the portfolio if they're below the 7% target return?
Absolutely. I mean, we can't afford to be in a place right now where our returns are lower than 7% because we might not be in a place where we can afford to make it up. So that has to be priority.
And Mr. Levine, you put out a plan to invest $2.5 billion of the pension funds into rehabilitation and new construction of affordable housing. Do you have a target return for those investments? Because of $2.5 billion, every point below 7% is $25 million, which would either have to be kicked in by the city taxpayers out of the operating budget or gained elsewhere. Could you please explain your thinking and what you expect those returns to be?
Look, I want to remind everybody that we have the worst housing affordability crisis in New York City history. Average rents published last month for Manhattan now are over $5,300 per month. This is a threat not just to low-wage workers, it's a threat to the middle class as well. It threatens the future of New York City. There's no shortcut here. We have to build more housing, and especially more affordable housing. And the biggest challenge to doing that is not finding the properties, though that's tough. We have 300 projects across New York City that are waiting for financing. And there's a shortage of that financing. We can use pension monies through the ETI portfolio to jumpstart that development. And typically, those returns are not much below 6%, very close to our target rate. It is a well-thought-out strategy to invest in the city in ways that yield benefits for New Yorkers, compensated by a larger portfolio that still must achieve its target 7%.
And portending our lightning round, let me just follow up for both of you, starting with Mr. Levine. The city currently is paying back earlier pension underfunding, but there is a bill in Albany that stretches that out, reducing pension contributions through 2032, but increasing them even more through 2044 for all systems except for police and fire. Do you support shifting those payments into the future?
Look, we have to be really cautious about our city's pension money, and we have to manage the portfolio so that we don't need to come in with extra tax dollars to subsidize losses. We need to smooth out returns over time so there's no shocks to the system, so we can budget.
I'm sorry, just clarification. Are you in favor or opposed of that bill?
I would support that bill, yes.
Mr. Brannan, same question. Do you support or oppose that bill?
I don't think it's necessary.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving into our round here where the answers are a little shorter, 1 minute each for this next round of questions, and then we move into the lightning round. So 1 minute each here. We're going to start with competitiveness and affordability in the city. You've each talked about affordability a little bit. Mr. Levine obviously making it a major focus of some of your remarks so far. So the city has lost population during the pandemic across all income and demographic groups, though the influx of migrants and seemingly some people moving back or people moving from other parts of the country have partially made up for that loss in the last few years. Are you concerned about population loss and the city's overall competitiveness for attracting and retaining both residents and businesses? And what controller authorities would you exercise to improve New York's standing with residents and businesses? 1 minute, please. Mr. Levine.
Yeah. Look, we have lost population, has serious implications for our economy, for our budget, for our school system, which is down enrollment. The #1 reason why people are leaving New York City, despite what you might read in the New York Post, is they cannot afford the cost of living here, the cost of housing, the cost of childcare, and so much more. The way to retain New Yorkers and to get back to a growing population is to make it possible for working people to live here. That's going to require building more housing, especially more affordable housing. It's going to require making it possible for families to afford childcare by extending UPK and 3K down to infants and toddlers. I will fight for these kinds of investments as comptroller. In some cases, we can advance these goals directly with the pension money. In other cases, I'll use the bully pulpit of the comptroller's office to advocate for budget investments to make this a place where New Yorkers don't need to leave because they can't afford.
Thank you.
In fact, they can stay here to raise their families.
And Mr. Brannan, 1 minute. Are you concerned about population loss and the city's overall competitiveness for attracting both residents and businesses, as well as retaining them?
Yeah, rich people aren't fleeing the city. Working families are, because they can't afford to live here. And working families are ultimately the bedrock of our economy. If we lose more working families to other cities that are more competitive, easier to do business, lower cost of living, we are at risk of losing our crown as the greatest city in the world. I think we rest on our laurels a little bit too much in the city of New York. Everyone agrees, I think, in this room that New York City is the best city on the planet, but we've got to invest in it. We have to maintain it. You have to water it. You have to look after it, and you have to nurture it. And I'm afraid that over the past couple of years, we've been taking it for granted, and other cities are eating our lunch. When it comes to making it easier for small businesses, making it easier for folks to put their kids into childcare. We're going to lose our crown if we don't invest in the future of the city. And the Comptroller's office, I believe, over the next 4 years, certainly with the threat from Washington, was going to play a huge role in that.
All right, so you both have acknowledged certainly that affordability and as part of that housing is a major challenge for New York. Obviously, there's been a lot of agreement recently on trying to tackle the supply of housing issue. The city council has passed City for Yes for Housing Opportunity and a package. Mr. Levine, you've focused on housing affordability as in your tenure as borough president, now in your candidacy for comptroller. So starting again with Mr. Levine here and then Mr. Brannan, 1 minute each, sticking with housing. What is the single most important next change needed to boost housing production in the city? And as part of that, do you think neighborhoods with slow housing development should be automatically upzoned or have more development as of right? What's next on housing supply from your vantage point, Mr. Levine?
Look, I'm really proud that the city passed City of Yes. This was extremely important for Manhattan. Among other things, it will enable the conversion of vacant office buildings. We have 90 million square feet of vacant office buildings in Midtown. And City of Yes will allow many more of them to be converted to housing. And thanks to a state program, they will include affordable units. But we need to do more. And one area that I've identified is the way that our environmental oversight process, while well-intentioned, is actually blocking housing that is good for our environment. If you want to build 200 units of affordable housing on top of a subway station right now, the project could be delayed or killed by people who sue based on environmental review. So I would support the streamlining of those environmental review requirements, certainly for affordable housing and potentially for all buildings up to, say, 200 units, so that we get people the housing they need, so that we have housing centered around mass transit. That is actually a victory for the environment and a win for our affordability.
And
crisis.
just in 10 seconds, what about neighborhoods where we don't see an increase in housing supply? What needs to be done?
There has to be a balance in every zoning decision between local stakeholders and the citywide priorities. This is what I have fought for as borough president. We can't just say no to all housing or we only worsen our crisis. I support a balance between those interests.
All right, Mr. Brannan, 1 minute. What's next on increasing housing supply and what specific steps do you favor to do so? And what do you think should happen in neighborhoods where housing development moves very slowly?
Sure. So I was proud to craft and pass the bill that allowed for the office to residential conversion. It started a task force to really explore the issue, and now we're seeing it in progress. We need to get more incentives there so we can be building more, not just doing the conversions to market rate, but doing the conversions to affordable housing. Because I think office to residential conversion, especially in Manhattan, is really the future. City of Yes, I helped whip votes for City of Yes in the city council. It wasn't easy. I think it needs to be okay for us to admit that we are a city of neighborhoods, and what might work in one neighborhood doesn't work in another, but there are ways to get there. And the $6 billion that we were able to fight for to accompany the City for All plan helps that, because we were able to get promises of investment in infrastructure, promises versus investment in housing vouchers and things that can accompany just the simple creation of housing. So I think there is a way to get there, but I think you have to work with each person one by one to make them understand that they have to share the responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to call this category applicable knowledge.
Oh, boy.
Please explain to New Yorkers what is so special about how New York City is required to manage its finances as was set up after the 1975 fiscal crisis. Mr. Brannan, you have 1 minute.
What is, say it again?
Please explain to New Yorkers what is special about how New York City is required to manage its finances as was set up after the 1975 fiscal crisis.
You know, the Fiscal Control Board, it's helpful because it reminds us that we have to get the budget passed by July 1st. I don't know that we really need it anymore, but it certainly puts a priority on that. You know, I think one of the things I think we could do a better job of writ large is explaining the process to people and just bringing New Yorkers into the process so they better understand what the budget means and how it's their tax dollars at work.
Mr. Levine, same question. How is New York City required to manage its finances different from other cities as was set up after the fiscal crisis? 1 minute, please.
Well, shout out to the late, great Dick Ravitch, who helped get us through that crisis. And we do have the legacy of those days in this entity that's unique to New York, the FCB, which right now really just plays an oversight role, which is appropriate, but it is there as a backstop in case we enter into some sort of extreme economic shock. I believe in local control. I want the budget to be decided by city government, and I hope it never comes to the need for the FCB to overrule us.
And Mr. Levine, one follow-up. Do you think there could ever be a situation that would justify the FCB being re-empowered to approve city spending and contracts?
That would have to be an extreme financial, economic, and fiscal shock that left New York City incapable of passing a budget that met the needs of our population. It's hard for me to imagine what that scenario would be right now, but the board does exist in case of those extreme circumstances.
And Mr. Brannan, do you ever see a situation that could justify FCB being re-empowered to approve city spending and contracts?
I mean, I think if we survived COVID without it, and those were tough budgets that I was a part of negotiating, I think we're okay. I don't think we need them.
And one lesson each from you, first starting with Mr. Brannan, that we should learn from the 1975 fiscal crisis.
I think we have to, you know, I think it goes back to the moment that we're in now about being honest about our fiscal reality. And I think you can't have, you know, fiscal responsibility if you're not being honest about what the city is working with. And that's what concerns me so much about this current administration, that when we come into a room, we have to at least agree that 2 and 2 equals 4 before we can start talking about our priorities. And right now we don't have that. So I'm worried that playing too much hide the ball can be risky.
Mr. Levine, same question. One lesson learned from 1975 fiscal crisis.
Well, one thing is that we don't need to empower shady business people like Donald Trump to get out of a fiscal crisis. I hope we don't repeat that mistake again by giving him control of Woolman Rink in Central Park. But more broadly, we learned about the dynamism of New York City's people and our economy. It takes a lot to knock us off track. This city's been going for 400 years. We have survived depression and war and pandemic. We're going to keep going with strong leadership, with a strong comptroller. This is the fight I'm in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, judgments and claims.
Take the politics out of
We're going to continue. Please stop disrupting the debate. Thank you.
Please.
Please stop disrupting the debate. Thank you. We went over the prerequisites for the debate earlier. Judgments and claims. Starting with Mr. Levine, the city pays $1.5 billion in judgments and claims per year. What's your one big fix to bring this number down significantly? Judgments and claims. The city pays $1.5 billion in judgments and claims per year. What's your big fix for bringing this number down? Mr. Levine, 1 minute.
Well, this is one of the most important roles of the Comptroller Office. Of course, we have to protect the city's finances and make sure that we don't pay out more than we need to. On the other hand, New Yorkers who have been harmed by the city have a right to compensation, whether they have had their basement flooded or whether they have been struck by a sanitation truck. And I think a good comptroller identifies patterns in those payouts to solve the underlying problems that are leading to them. So if we repeatedly have flooding in a given neighborhood, the comptroller needs to demand that we upgrade the sewer system there. If we repeatedly have payouts because people are being hit by a sanitation truck on the same route again and again, let's fix the route. So the comptroller needs to engage in a level of analysis to fix the underlying problems. That's the win-win. You don't want people being harmed in the first place, and the comptroller can help assure that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Brannan, 1 minute.
I mean, I think they have to be judged on the merits. They need to make fiscal sense. You have to be deliberate and patient with each one. You have to make sure you have the staffing in your office to oversee these payments. I think back to when we had massive flooding in Southeast Queens a couple of years ago, where most of those folks never ended up getting paid out, or you had a tree fall on your car and you didn't get paid out while other people are getting paid out. But I think it's important to then structurally find, if you're seeing repeated claims in certain areas in places where the city is failing, then you have to go and make the case to actually fix those issues, for instance, in infrastructure issues.
The city has a $103 billion liability to fund retiree health and other post-employment benefits, $103 billion liability, but only $5 billion in the retiree health benefits trust. Should the city be funding these benefits in the same way it funds its pension liability, by putting money away as city employees earn their benefits, starting with Mr. Brannan?
So I think the real conversation here, and I think the real shoe that is still waiting to drop, is the cost of healthcare in this country and in this city, specifically the cost of hospitalization, the soaring cost of hospitalization and prescription drugs. I think that is really the lights that are barreling down the tunnel at us right now that we need to focus on. My colleague, Councilmember Julie Menon, passed a bill to introduce and create an Office of Healthcare Accountability to get a better understanding and how much the city is actually paying out for healthcare. We're paying way higher than Medicare rates in some situations. Probably could be saving about $2 billion. That is a conversation that needs to be had that I don't believe we're having now. And I think we're sort of just, we're delaying our destiny there, because there's going to be a reckoning, and we need to have the conversation sooner than later.
And do you think, just to follow up and clarify, do you think the city should fund retiree health benefits like pensions?
I do.
Mr. Levine, same question. Do you think the city should fund retiree health benefits like it funds its pensions?
Yes, I do. And I think we need to stop rating that fund as a way to cover losses in our budget. Much better to have it set aside in a rainy day fund. Much better to have accurate accounting that doesn't underestimate expenses. And I certainly agree that we have to bend the curve on healthcare costs in New York City for the benefit of municipal workers and all New Yorkers, so that we get value for what we spend on healthcare.
Now we're going to switch to, as I think Ben Mack said, the ever exciting lightning round. Starting the final section with yes or
Exciting
no,
for
or
who?
otherwise short. Excuse me?
Exciting for who?
Everyone involved in
Okay.
yes or no.
Viewers at home.
Would you support a law to mandate deposits to the rainy day fund when the economy is growing and only allow withdrawals during a recession or time-limited emergency? Mr. Brannan, yes or no?
I would consider it.
Mr. Levine, yes or no?
I'm going to say yes.
Would you support using the rainy day fund, the current rainy day fund, $2 billion, to backfill potential federal cuts? Mr. Levine, yes or no?
If we enter in a crisis where critical services could be lost, yes.
Mr. Brannan, yes or no?
Got to be careful there. Can't look like we can afford the cuts.
Mr. Brannan, I think Mr. Levine answered this earlier. Do you think the city should add another $1 billion to its general reserve to mitigate the initial impact of potential federal cuts?
I think we should have it ready, but I don't think we can look like we can afford these cuts right now.
Mr. Levine?
Look, we face cuts that could be in the tens of billions if you look at the economic shock, the loss of state aid, the loss of direct federal aid.
Yes or no?
So $1 billion is the least we could do.
All right. These next three are very short answers, but they're not yes or no's. Mr. Levine first here. If any, name one important way you think the state budget does not treat the city fairly. Mr. Levine.
It's outrageous. We send more money to Albany every year than we get back.
One thing, name one thing, please. Lightning round. One way that the state budget does not treat the city fairly.
Oh, well, we should get better foundation aid for our schools.
Thank you. Mr. Brannan.
The MTA.
Okay. Mr. Brannan, first here, would you increase, decrease, or keep income tax rates on high income earners the same? Increase, decrease, or keep the same? Tax rates on high income earners.
I'm a fan, you know, I support progressive taxation and I would always consider.
Consider it. Mr. Levine.
Oh, absolutely. People who make money need to pay their fair share. It's best to be done at the federal level so we don't
Thank
have
you.
to compete with neighboring states.
Mr. Levine, first here, keep, scrap, or adjust congestion pricing.
Congestion pricing has been an enormous success.
Keep, scrap, or
and I would
adjust.
keep it.
Keep. Mr. Brannan.
Keep.
On a scale of 1 being unfamiliar to 5 being extremely knowledgeable,
Oh, boy.
please rate your knowledge of generally accepted accounting principles, Mr. Brannan, 1 to 5.
Compared to your knowledge,
1 to 5, Mr. Brannan.
I'd say a 3.
Mr. Levine,
Don't say 1.
Wait, was 1 the highest or 5 the highest?
1 is unfamiliar to
Maybe
5
that's
extremely
a
knowledgeable.
general accepted accounting principle right there as well.
Sorry,
You said 1 was highest?
1 was lowest.
Okay. Look, I used to run a financial institution. I used to live in.
1 to
1 to
5.
5.
So I'm going to give myself at least a 4.
Yes or no, would you like me now to ask you about a specific accounting principle, Mr. Levine?
That would be no.
Mr. Brannan,
0.
I assume you both believe that schools should get more money if enrollment grows. Do you think schools should get less money if enrollment shrinks, even though that would cause those schools to get more money per student, which is arguably inequitable? Mr. Brannan,
This is a yes or no?
do you think schools should get less money if enrollment shrinks?
No.
Mr. Levine,
In the short term, you have to smooth out the shock. So there's going
Yes
to
or
have
no?
to be a maintenance of the funding in the short term.
All right. Mr. Levine, first here, given the ballooning cost of the 4 new jails and their capacity being less than the number of people currently under custody by a large number, should the plan to close Rikers continue or be revamped? Continue or be revamped, Mr. Levine?
Look, this was set in law by the city council because Rikers is a disaster that should shame all of us. We're nowhere near meeting the timeline.
Continue
Obviously,
or
we have to
revamped?
adjust to deal with
Adjust the
that.
timeline. Mr. Brannan.
Yeah, we have to close Rikers. We have an administration right now that's doing everything it can to not close Rikers. We
continue or revamped?
continue.
Okay. Mr. Brannan first. Name one city agency that the city should spend less on and one city agency that the city should spend more on.
The city should spend more on HPD, and I think could spend less on NYPD.
So Levine, less and more.
We should invest more in affordable housing in the city, more money for HPD and NYCHA as well. I think we can save money across a variety of agencies by reining in overtime.
Name one, please.
All the uniform agencies.
Okay.
Final question. Could you please, in 30 seconds, tell us your top accomplishment as a public official, Mr. Levine? Top accomplishment as a public official.
I'm really proud to have made history in New York City by passing legislation that makes us the first place in America with a right to counsel for tenants facing eviction in housing court. This has been a game change for tenants. The eviction rate now is half what it was before we passed the law. It started a national movement. It is not fully funded today. And there are still tenants who are facing evictions in New York City who are not getting that right fulfilled. So I will fight to make sure that we are giving contracts to legal service providers that allow them to serve every single tenant facing eviction.
Mr. Brannan, your top accomplishment as a public official.
My top accomplishment has been not surviving this debate without getting outwonked by Andrew Rein. I would say I'm building 7 new public schools in my district. When I was first elected, I promised to build 1. They told us we didn't have the money, even though our district was severely overcrowded. And now we're building 7 public schools. I'm very proud of that.
Thank you. And that concludes this morning's debate. I want to thank our candidates, Councilmember Justin Brannan and Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine.
And thank you all for being here this morning. And for those who tuned in by Zoom or watching or listening at a later date, it's been a great conversation. Please stay engaged in this race and learn more about these candidates and others who may be running in the primary or general election. And remember, primary day is June 24th, and the fall election will be coming up after that. And lastly, thank you to New York Law School and our teams here, and to Citizens Budget Commission. Thank you.
Thank you.